All right, and now, the reason you all came, let's get the show started. I'm going to ask Rick Aiken to introduce our speakers.
Okay, guys, let's come on up and we'll get started. We got a lot of ground to plow tonight. Let's switch this tape back just a little bit there. And so we're going to get right to it. Our speakers tonight are John Lamb.
Good evening.
John has been working in the oil and gas industry for about 35 years. I started working in the oil and gas industry when I was in high school, and don't tell anybody, but I didn't have a driver's license when I started pumping oil wells. But I learned about it from the business end of a shovel. He actually knows the science. So he's going to enlighten us about how all this really works. And of course, as I always say, no energy panel is complete without a buffalo rancher. We have our buffalo rancher, Bob Beauprez, from his ranch by Walden. He's had a few other jobs too. He served in Congress 2 terms, was the Republican nominee for governor in 2006, was at one time a banker, at one time a real estate developer, at one time a dairyman. He's had a hard time holding a job, but we love him anyway. So the way we're going to do this is John is going to start and explain to us physically how all this works. Then we're going to move to Bob, who's going to comment about why we're having this controversy. And so I want you to hold your questions to the end. We're going to try to keep 30 minutes at the end for questions, so we should have ample time. And I know you'll have a lot of questions. I was, of course, grew up in Oklahoma, and as I said, worked in the oil field when I was in high school and college. And I was very surprised when this controversy about fracking first came up, because where I grew up, to say an oil well had been fracked was like saying the sun had come up in the east that morning. And that was just what happened. And it had been going since the 40s. And it was just thoroughly unremarkable. So I didn't really understand why we're having this controversy all of a sudden. But as I've kind of studied it, it seems to have flared up after the HBO movie Gasland. People are very much affected by movies. Anybody know how many nuclear reactors have been built since the movie The China Syndrome, built in the United States? Zero. So these movies have a lot of impact, and you know, we want to give you a flavor for it. So Quentin, let's go ahead and give them clip number 1. This is from the movie Gasland, and this is kind of their prize clip. So you'll I think enjoy this.
Maybe I saw it go up for a second.
Yeah. Just give it a second. Whoa, Jesus Christ. That's the best I've done.
Well, that's pretty impressive that you can light the water in your kitchen sink on fire. So, John, tell us, why should we be using this procedure that makes our water catch on fire?
Well, yeah. The clip from Gaslands was from the Appalachian Basin. The Appalachian Basin is an old sedimentary basin. It is a very, the ground rock, the rocks of the subsurface are very dry there. And oil and gas, that is hydrocarbons, do what they normally do, and that is migrate toward the surface. They're always floating upward. Oil floats on water. It's very common throughout the Appalachian Basin to have accumulations of gas and or oil in freshwater sands, in freshwater aquifers. And to illustrate that, I brought a clip from Baku, Azerbaijan. Marco Polo first wrote about this place in his first travels.
And this is just the side of the mountain on fire.
That's a surface seep of natural gas.
Show you where it is.
Well, we've gone from a flaming kitchen faucet to a flaming hillside. Both are naturally occurring, and neither is the result of hydraulic fracturing. And I put together a PowerPoint for you all that I hope will educate you. All right, you can just start rolling through it. There we go. Oil is naturally occurring. It's been created by the process of alteration of organically rich sediments by pressure and heat. Oil always migrates into and through the subsurface water-bearing strata. When it's found on the surface, when it's leaked to the surface, it's called a seep. And we just saw a demonstration of a gas seep. Here's a stylized geologic drawing of an oil seep. You see the oil reservoir is leaking up dip toward the surface. Here's an example of an actual oil seep field. The dark coloration in the hillside is oil, is hydrocarbon. Here's a picture of a flowering plant in the middle of an oil seep. This is interesting. The first mention of oil in North America was 1627, again in the Appalachian Basin. And the reason that I wanted to bring this to your attention is this is an artesian spring. That is, it's an artesian a spring that the water is flowing constantly to the surface and into a creek. There is enough oil in that water stream that it collects on the side of the stream bed, and once again, oil and gas are naturally occurring in the environment. And here's a real nice example, in my opinion, of what Rick had brought up with the flaming kitchen spigot. In the early days of the oil industry, our exploration efforts centered around the looking for oil and gas seeps at the surface. And then, as was done in the Appalachian Basin in the late 1700s, they would dig into the creek banks where the oil was running out of, and then they would put buckets in there and collect the oil and sell it for medicine. There were some 700 barrels of oil produced in West Virginia for medicinal qualities prior to 1860. Example of what the oil and gas business looked like originally. Here in Colorado, we have a long history of oil and gas. In 1862, that is just 3 years, actually 2.5 years after the first commercial well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, the Florence oil field was discovered. It is still producing today. White River Dome, that's nearby, was discovered in 1890. White River Dome is pretty interesting in that it's a gas field, and in 1890 there were no pipelines. Heck, in 1940 there were no pipelines. And so what they did is they directed the well flow against an iron sheet and set the well flow on fire. And then periodically they would divert the well flow to another iron sheet, let it cool off, and then scrape the soot off. And the soot was bagged, sent on a mule train to a railhead to where it was shipped to the iron producing states, where it was combined with steel to make carbon steel for the war effort. So that was our early use of natural gas, what we call stranded natural gas. That is natural gas that has no outlet to market. And the Rockies are full of stranded natural gas. Little history, just taken the other day, that's called a cable tool drilling rig. And it's an adaptation from the mid-1800s of what was called the spring pole technology. And spring pole technology was developed by the Chinese about 400 AD for drilling of brine wells. Well, science entered into it. We were no longer looking for surface expression of oil and gas, but we started looking at the structure of the rocks and how that comes into play in the trapping of oil and gas. As a result of that, Toe Creek field was found in 1924. And Toe Creek is an anticline. You can see it as you drive through the Narrows near the old Mount Harris town site. You can see the surface expression of the anticline. There's a map of Routt County. You can see that the oil and gas exploration exclusively has been in the western 2/3 of the county. The eastern 1/3, the rocks that are found are not conducive for the finding of oil and gas. Okay, locally, the Niobrara Shale, 85 million years old. When it was deposited, it was rich in organic matter, that is leaves, branches, dead plankton, fish, dinosaurs, you name it. There's an example of what North America looked like during Cretaceous time, that is during the deposition of the Niobrara. You can see that Colorado is mostly underwater. Well, the next step in the diagenesis is compression. We start out 40% water, 60% organic matter, and as the rocks are buried, the water is expelled and leaving just the dense source rock. How do we get oil out of a source rock? We heat it and subject it to pressure. At 140 degrees, generation of hydrocarbons begins. The generation is maximized at about 210 degrees. As the oil and gas are generated from the kerogen, they're causing an expansion within the source rock. That expansion causes microfracturing. The microfracturing is a pathway for the leakage or the migration of the newly generated oil and gas from the source rock. Reservoir. This is our term in the oil industry to describe where the oil and gas has been trapped. Conventional reservoirs were our first target in looking for oil and gas. And it can be best defined as a rock which has sufficient permeability to allow oil and gas to be produced. Geologically speaking, a reservoir is trapped by an impermeable seal across the top of the formation. Here's another stylized geologic drawing. It's an anticline, low on either side, high in the middle. You can see a limestone formation with an accumulation of oil, and then a very thin seal, a Devonian shale, which is the seal for the reservoir. Go ahead. These are micrographs of the actual cuttings from one of the wells that we just described in the previous view. Those are the reservoir, the little holes. That's the reservoir that the vast pool of oil and gas is found. It's not a cavern, it's actually space, pore space within the rocks. Unconventional reservoir. by definition, requires hydraulic stimulation, fracture stimulation for oil and gas to be produced, or the combination of horizontal drilling and fracture stimulation. And that is because that there is very low permeability. That is, there's a very slight ability for the oil or gas to move through the rock. Source rocks are where oil and gas are generated. Reservoir rocks are where oil and gas are trapped. In unconventional reservoirs, a source rock may become a reservoir rock. That happens through the inability for the oil or gas to migrate out of the rock. That is, more is being kept in than is escaping towards the surface. If it's really hot, the oil is cracked into gas. This is as of May of last year. This is a map from our government that shows the different shale plays within the United States. You can see the Niobrara there in northwest Colorado, just a small dot. I can tell you that this map is incorrect, or at least it's a partial map. There's a new shale play that is happening right now at the border of Arkansas and Louisiana, and that's a subsalt shale play. And it's attracting a lot of attention within the industry. However, there's not a lot of information that's out about it as of yet. With horizontal drilling, and I say the combination of directional or horizontal drilling technology, and a directional well is a well that is drilled toward a specific target. That is, it is a specific place in the subsurface that they wish to drill to, and the well stops at that point. So there's some sort of lateral displacement of a few hundred feet or even several thousand feet from the surface, and that's a directionally drilled well. A horizontally drilled well is one that is drilled literally horizontal, and they're drilled, a directional well penetrates the reservoir vertically. A horizontal well penetrates the well horizontally or from the side. The benefit of a horizontal well is, for example, a 25-foot thick formation that is oil saturated. You penetrate it vertically, you have 25 feet of pay. If you're able to drill horizontally within that formation, you can have 10,000 feet of pay, literally. And it allows us to be very efficient and very non-invasive during our drilling and exploration. And as I state there, 2 horizontally drilled wells can produce as much as 16 wells, requiring 16 individual well sites and an additional 15 roads beyond the first location. And we have a short video for you on drilling.
Should be number 4.
After the well site has been carefully prepared to meet environmental, health, and safety standards, drilling can begin. This is an intricate operation requiring a well-planned infrastructure. A variety of processes and expert, well-trained specialists are used to bring natural gas to the surface. Chesapeake works with these experts during every aspect of the project, while strictly adhering to all individual state regulations. During the drilling process, the rig is in constant operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for approximately 21 to 28 days. As an added precaution in some areas, a protective mat covers 2/3 of the pad site. Utilizing heavy-duty industrial-strength drill bits, A typical well is drilled in several stages, starting with a large diameter drill bit and then successively smaller drill bits as the drilling is advanced. After drilling each portion of the well, nested steel protective casing is cemented into place. This will protect groundwater and maintain the integrity of the well. Initially, and prior to moving in the drilling rig, a large diameter hole is drilled for the first 50 to 80 feet. Conductor casing is then cemented into place, stabilizing the ground around the drilling rig and wellhead, and isolating the well from most private water wells. In the Marcellus area, the freshwater zone extends to approximately 800 feet below ground. The freshwater zone consists of porous sandstone and rock stratus, containing water within the pore space of the rock. Chesapeake utilizes air drilling until the hole is advanced to an average of 100 to 200 feet below the base of the freshwater zone. This provides added protection to the freshwater zone. A series of compressors and boosters generate the air that is used to lift the rock cuttings and fresh water into steel bins. The rock cuttings are then disposed of within state guidelines and permits. The drilling equipment is retracted to the surface and stored for the second stage of drilling. To protect the integrity of the hole and to protect the surrounding deep freshwater zone, a second layer of steel casing, called surface casing, is installed and cemented inside the newly drilled hole and conductor casing. Cement is pumped down through the surface casing and up along the sides of the well to provide a proper seal. This completely isolates the well from the deepest of private or municipal water wells. A blowout preventer is installed after the surface casing has been cemented. The blowout preventer is a series of high-pressure safety valves and seals attached to the top of the casing to control well pressure and prevent surface releases. Next, a small drilling assembly is passed down through the surface casing. At the bottom of the casing, the bit drills through the float equipment and cement, continuing its journey to the natural gas target area, as deep as 8,000 feet below the surface. The drilling method employed below the surface casing uses drilling mud, which is a non-hazardous mixture based on bentonite clay or synthetic thickeners. In addition to lifting the rock cuttings out of the hole, drilling mud also helps to stabilize the hole, cool the drill bit, and control downhole pressure. A few hundred feet above the target shale, the drilling assembly comes to a stop. The entire string is retracted to the surface to adjust the drilling assembly and install a special drilling tool. This tool allows Chesapeake to gradually turn the drill bit until a horizontal plane is reached. The remainder of the well is drilled in this horizontal plane while in contact with the gas-producing shale. Drilling continues horizontally through the shale at lengths greater than 4,000 feet from the point where it entered the formation. Once drilling is completed, the equipment is retracted to the surface. Then, a smaller diameter casing, called production casing, is installed throughout the total length of the well. The production casing is cemented and secured in place by pumping cement down through the end of the casing. Depending on regional geologic conditions, the cement is pumped around the outside casing wall to approximately 2,500 feet above the producing shale formation or to the surface. The cement creates a seal to ensure that formation fluids can only be produced via the production casing. After each layer of casing is installed, the well is pressure tested to ensure its integrity for continued drilling. A cross-section of the well below surface reveals several protective layers: cement, conductor casing, cement, surface casing, drilling mud, production casing, and then production tubing through which the produced gas and water will flow. 7 layers of protection. Horizontal drilling offers many advantages when compared to vertical drilling. Since horizontal wells contact more of the gas-producing shale, fewer wells are needed to optimally develop a gas field. Multiple wells can be drilled from the same pad sites. For example, development of a 1,280-acre tract of land using conventional vertical drilling techniques could require as many as 32 vertical wells, with each having its own pad site. However, one multi-well pad site with horizontal wells can effectively recover the same natural gas reserves from the 1,280-acre tract of land while reducing the overall surface disturbance by 90%.
I would like to apologize for using an oil company's video. There's a little bit of self-promotion on their part. However, the process is the same in every horizontal well. What differs from area to area is the completion techniques utilized for that well, for that formation. For example, some formations are very highly freshwater sensitive, meaning that if you introduce fresh water into the formation, the clays within the formation will swell, sealing off any permeability and permanently damaging the formation. So that's an example of just one reason why differing technologies and differing techniques are used in different areas. Here's a picture, and I'm sorry I had this guy's name. He died in 1871, and he met the fate of a lot of what they called torpedo men. He has a jug of nitroglycerin that he's pouring into a metal vessel called a torpedo. And then the torpedo is dropped down the well. When it hits the bottom, it explodes, and we have fracturing by explosives. I believe this fellow's name was Tapley. I found some other pictures of the aftermath of the nitroglycerin wagon exploding. Usually there wasn't much left. All right, thank you. Before we get to hydraulic stimulation, I do want to mention Project Plowshare, which was another attempt at fracturing by explosives. And in this case, it was nuclear detonation. Project Plowshare, from 1967 to 1973, as an experiment in the peaceful uses of nuclear weapons, there's actually an acronym for that, attempted to fracture hydrocarbon-bearing wells. And a total of 5 devices were exploded in 3 wells, 2 of them in Colorado and 2 in New Mexico. The end result was not enough fracturing and very radioactive gas. So, as I say, a newer, safer fracturing technology was invented. I agree. Okay, it is not violent. All right, it is not. It is a very simple process. We're not blasting. It's very simply pumping fluid and sand down a wellbore at high rate and pressure with the end effect of creating a fracture system. You can read the rest of it. That's it. That's hydraulic fracturing. That's what we do. That's in a nutshell. Next one, please. Fracture stimulation. The fluid or the medium is designed to create new fractures, transports the proppant from the surface to the fractures, packs the fracture with proppant, and then the proppant remains in place, allowing the flow of oil and gas back into the wellbore. Quick definition, proppant is typically is sand, quartz sand, and it props the fractures open. That's where the name term proppant has come from. Typically water-based fluids are used, gel fluid and slick water fluid. Slick water is the most commonly used. That's what the majority of the hydraulic fracturing jobs in shale wells are pumped with. Slick water has very few constituents, I believe 3 additives. A gelled fluid requires more additives the gel fluid, the fluid has viscosity, just like making gravy. Nitrogen or carbon dioxide can be used to energize the fluid. Those are used in formations that don't have a lot of, in wells that don't have a lot of pressure within the formation. It can't lift a lot of fluid up to the surface, and so we'll use carbon dioxide or nitrogen to help lift that fluid back up to surface. Additionally, we have the expansion of the carbon dioxide or nitrogen downhole as it's heated, and that aids in the fracturing process. Recently, a well was fracked by Quicksilver using propane, natural gas. We may find that, again, the Niobrara is one of those very highly water-sensitive formations, and Quicksilver is working very hard to find the right key to unlock that resource for us. Full disclosure, here's a health risk from hydraulic fracturing. Silicosis. This is where the sand is added to the pumping process, and the sand is coming out of conveyor belt and dropping down in through this grate, and that grate is being sucked like a garbage disposal, if you wish, into the fracturing fluid. The health risk I'm talking about, sand, if you're breathing fine particles of quartz, you're subject to silicosis. That's a health risk, one of the few health risks actually associated with it. He's wearing the proper PP&E. He's wearing goggles, he's wearing a respirator mask, and he's wearing hearing protection. In the late 1970s, a new type of fracturing technology was developed. It was called massive hydraulic fracturing. It was first applied in the Cotton Valley limestone in the late 70s by Mitchell Energy. Mitchell looked at the success that they had from these frac jobs in the Cotton Valley, and they thought, well, what about this other formation called the Barnett Shale? Let's try it there. Well, not only did they try these massive well fracturing techniques in the Barnett Shale, they also started drilling it horizontally, and that kicked off the modern resource play or short shale gas play. And here we have a fracturing video from, again, Chesapeake. I apologize for their name being on it, but the information is quite good.
In order to maximize the production potential of the well, the shale formation will be hydraulically fractured. In preparation for the fracturing process, the casing will be perforated in the horizontal portion of the well using tubing-conveyed perforating guns containing explosive charges. The perforated intervals are spaced approximately 50 to 80 feet apart and create a connection between the production casing and the shale formation. With the initial perforating complete, the tubing and perforating guns are pulled to the surface, and the workover rig is replaced by a hydraulic fracturing crew consisting of a number of high-pressure pumps and blending equipment. This equipment will pump a mixture of water and proppant, usually sand, through the newly created perforations in the production casing and into the shale formation. First, water is passed from a water storage impoundment into the blue working tanks depicted on this location. The water is then pulled into a hydration unit, which provides the ability to gel the fluid before it is transferred to the blender. At the blender, proppant and a small amount of chemicals that aid in the fracturing process are added. The blender transfers the fluid and proppant mixture to the pump trucks. Through the low pressure side of the manifold, the fracturing pumps increase the pressure of the fluid, sending it back through the high pressure side of the manifold to the fractory where it enters the well. The entire fracturing process is controlled from the treatment monitoring van. When the fracturing fluid reaches the perforations, pressure builds until the shale formation fractures, allowing fluid to enter into the formation. Additional fractures are created along natural zones of weakness in the shale, These fractures are contained within the shale formation, well below the ground. After an initial stage of fluid called the pad is pumped to create a fracture area, proppant is added to the fluid and is distributed throughout the newly created fracture network. At the conclusion of the fracturing treatment, the proppant allows the fractures to remain open so that the natural gas can flow into the production casing and to the surface. This completes the first of several stages in the fracturing process. This process is repeated by lowering and pumping down an isolation plug and perforating guns into the wellbore to complete the next stage of fracturing. This time, the tools are conveyed into the well by a wireline unit, which allows the fracturing process to proceed much faster and more efficiently. A lubricator is used to control the pressure of the well while the operation is taking place. On the bottom of the perforating gun, a composite bridge plug is placed to isolate the newly fractured zone. This ensures that the subsequent fracturing treatment is contained in the current zone. The perforating gun is again fired at roughly 50 to 80 foot intervals, creating a connection between the production casing and the shale formation. The fracturing process is then repeated until all of the stages are completed. A typical shale well has approximately 8 to 12 stages of fracturing. At the conclusion of the fracturing operations, the isolation plugs are removed from the well and production can start. The produced fluids are diverted through a flowback manifold into storage tanks. The fluids are then recycled or disposed of according to state and federal regulations.
We hear an awful lot about how much water is used in hydraulic fracturing. And it really sounds like a lot. But we need to compare it so that we can put it in scale. There we go. The upper numbers are, it was a USGS report, United States Geological Survey report on water usage in golf courses in Colorado. And in the oil industry, we use barrels for a unit, and a barrel consists of 42 gallons. And so it's a little easier for me to put barrels on there rather than gallons. Gallons gets a little large. Almost 500,000 barrels of water were used in 2005 to irrigate golf courses in Colorado. That's a fact. Now, I've estimated water usage from the anticipated 3,100 horizontal wells that should be drilled this year in the U.S. 142,000 barrels of water per well gives us a little more water being used nationwide for hydraulic fracturing than what we use here in Colorado for watering golf courses. I didn't have the chance to fully introduce our firm, Steamboat Energy Consultants, but if you would ask, when I was working in the field, if you asked me on a day, which I had good humor, which was quite a bit of the time, what I did for a living, I would say I work with other people's hands and spend other people's money. And that is, we are operations supervisors. We provide expert assistance to oil and gas companies to help them accomplish their tasks. And we have over 20 consultants. Most of our consultants are directly involved with hydraulic fracturing, either the actual process before or the pre-frac setup or the post-frac work that's involved. As such, I was able to get some data from a well that was just finished a couple of days ago. 11 million gallons of water, 11.5 million gallons of water, 4.5 million pounds of sand in 38 stages. We pump these frac jobs are pumped in stages. A stage is a discrete length of the horizontal well. Typically Typically, it's about 300 feet to the stage. There's some technology that's been developed that we can actually treat 50-foot intervals, 50 to 80-foot stages. However, typically 300-foot stages. So 38 stages, 300 foot apiece, ended up with 11.5 million gallons of water being pumped. In addition to the 11 million gallons of water, there were some additions. Friction reducer, clay stabilizer and surfactant, and biocide. Friction reducer lowers the friction between the fluid and the steel pipe, allowing you to pump more fluid at the same or lower pumping pressure than you would without the friction reducer. Clay stabilizer, that prevents the clays within the formation from swelling and damaging the formation. And surfactant, that adds, a soap is a surfactant that adds bubbles to the liquid to give it a little bit of viscosity and carrying ability to help carry the sand downhole out into the fractures. Biocide, biocide is used to prevent the growth of bacteria, sulfur-reducing bacteria, which creates H2S. All of us here in Steamboat know the smell of hydrogen sulfide, or H2S. Our springs here in town, over by the library, have H2S in them, and that's what you smell in the air. That's a sulfur-reducing bacteria. There's also acid-producing bacteria that produces an acid that eats the steel well casing and corrodes it. So we use biocide to prevent those biological activities. And again, out of the total, 99.83% water. Next one, please. The video left off with the fracturing job being completed. I'll pick up at that point. We demobilize, move all the fracturing equipment off the location and begin our flowback. And the flowback is, go ahead and go to the next one, please. The fluid flow for the flowback is controlled through this valve system. This is a series of chokes that regulates the flow, the pressurized flow of water, gas, and oil from the well. The fluid flows through the, go back please, back to, there we go. Fluid flows through the choke, and well pressures will start out fairly high and they'll slowly drift down. Well flows are kept, engineers will tell us how much they want the well to flow, how many barrels per hour. Generally we see hydrocarbons very quickly. As soon as we see them, the fluid returns are passed through a separator. Flowback water is a mixture of formation fluids and fracturing fluids. Formation fluid may be water, it may be oil, it may be natural gas in a liquid phase. Liquid phase downhole in a vapor or a gaseous phase at surface pressure. The flowback fluid is stored on location until it's hauled to a disposal facility or processing for reuse. Any hydrocarbons will have been removed by the separator prior to the storage. Water analysis is done daily, both to determine how much fracturing fluid is present in the well flow, as well as whether or not there's any proppant coming back as well. Hydraulic fracturing is environmentally beneficial by decreasing the amount of wells drilled and enabling each well to be more productive. Cost effective, it has in part caused the recent decrease in natural gas prices. And that's a 75% decrease in natural gas prices in the last 3 years. By my travels to the eastern United States, number 3 I can attest to, it's reinvigorating America's economic engine by increasing employment with increased business formation and the growth of existing business sectors existing businesses in a wide range of economic sectors. We can see it in Pennsylvania, in Ohio. These states were hit hard beginning in the late 1970s with the importation of cheap Japanese and Oriental steel. And for example, steel mills are running again, making steel well casing using this clean burning, cheap natural gas to fire their foundries instead of coal. Hydraulic fracturing is being used more frequently in larger amounts in unconventional shale reservoirs. It's been in use for decades. Been used in nearly 1 million wells in the U.S. It is not a drilling technique. It is a completion technology. It's not new and untested. We're not using more water than agriculture. We're not polluting drinking water supplies, public or private. There is no documented scientific evidence. There's plenty of what I call YouTube evidence. YouTube evidence is strictly an assertion. There are no facts behind it. It is an opinion. Next, please. Thank you very much. We do have handouts in the back that have some additional information on the water cycle, information, a short glossary on oil industry terms, and a couple of maps. There's one for everyone. Thank you so much.
So I think we can conclude from that fracking is not punching a hole in the ground and pumping in chemicals. It's a little bit more involved. I'm going to kind of go a little quick here and then get to Bob. Back to the lighting the water on fire. We have another little video clip for you. It seems there's perhaps a little more to that story too. We're going to see a sign about some burning springs. We're going to see an interview of Josh Fox, the director of Gasland. And the audio's a little hard to hear, but there's subtitles. And then finally, you're going to hear what Lisa Jackson, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, says about fracking. So, Quentin, let's give them clip number 6.
Appalachian Basin.
I think that letting your water start with fracking. You've said yourself, people lift their water long before fracking started. Isn't that correct?
Well, yes, but it's not relevant.
Is there any evidence that hydraulic fracturing, however, can affect aquifers and water supplies?
There is evidence that it can certainly affect them. I'm not aware of any proven case where the fracking process itself affected water, although there are investigations ongoing.
Okay, Bob. We see how involved the process is. We see the producer of Gasland admitting that you could light the water before there was fracking. We see the EPA administrator saying, well, there's really no evidence, no proven case that fracking has affected drinking water. So what is this about?
It's about politics. In addition to EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson making that testimony, and that didn't get near enough play. I wish people would hear that. And if you aren't familiar, Lisa Jackson came to the administration with a very well-established, high-profile record from New Jersey as the environmental administrator there, the main regulator. She's a pretty hardcore environmental activist. She was well-credentialed. In addition to the testimony she had to give under oath to Congress very recently, I'm very much aware of that testimony, a name familiar to all of you, Ken Salazar, Secretary of Interior now, our former senator, offered exactly the same testimony. No record, no documented case of fracking contaminating groundwater. Now, I haven't said all that. Let me back up a little bit and just, it's volunteer. I get why people are concerned. We all have to depend on, we rely on, not only water to drink and do our laundry and give our kids, but I mean, water is life. And somebody tells you got a contaminated drinking water, you're going to get pretty agitated pretty quickly. I get that. It is a health hazard. And if there was a link, if there was some legitimate scientific reason to be concerned, you can bet that there'd be a whole lot of people pretty quick to pull the trigger. What has happened here, I see a pattern. I'm old enough, some of you in here are about the same generation as me, you probably remember some of these. How many of you remember growing up and being told repeatedly, we're about to run out of fossil fuels? Yeah. In fact, we had a president, Jimmy Carter, who believed the same apparently, and told us in 1977 from the White House that the oil and natural gas we rely on for 75% of our energy are running out. Carter went on to say that we could use up all, this is a direct quote, that the depletion was so fast that the world could use up all the proven reserves of oil in the entire world by the end of the next decade. Didn't quite happen that way. And I'm not trying to make fun of Jimmy Carter, maybe just a little bit. But there was a whole bunch of people that believed that same stuff because that was what we were told. Well, technology, thanks to people like John, technology has helped us find a whole lot more, and a whole lot more that they knew was down there we can now harvest. So we went through a cycle of we're going to run out, we got to do something different. That was the big fear tactic for a while. And we went through a cycle of we're all going to freeze to death because the next ice age is coming. And well, when it started getting warmer instead of colder, we were suddenly going to boil like frogs in a pot, and global warming was going to take us all over, and we were all scared to death about that. And all of them had just a shred of believability to them, and got a whole lot of people panicked. But when you come along and talk to the people that are actually in the field, like John, and you go through a briefing like you just had, and by the way, you just got a pretty high-level congressional briefing. These are the kind of things that not near enough members of Congress take advantage of. A higher percentage of their staff would take advantage of. But this is how I would hope good policy is wedded with good politics. But unfortunately right now we've got elections that are being determined by more politics than policy. And frankly on both sides. Frankly on both sides. One party, my party, the Republican Party, has been pretty well wedded to let's go get the energy and let's do it as efficiently and as quickly and cost effective and safely as we possibly can. And the other one is controlled. I don't think this is any great revelation to anybody in this room. The other one is home, safe haven to a lot of people that classify themselves as environmental activists.
Let me interrupt you just a second.
Yeah.
Let's talk about enforcement. Let's give them clip number 7. This is the regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency.
Oh, I think Region 6 administrator?
I think it's
The
Region
former?
7 actually. Here we go.
I was at a meeting once and I gave an analogy to my staff about my philosophy on enforcement. And I think it was probably a little crude and maybe not appropriate for the meeting, but I'll go ahead and tell you what I said. It was kind of like how the Romans used to conquer little villages, Mediterranean. They'd go to a little Turkish town somewhere, they'd find the first 5 guys they saw, they crucify them. Then, that town was really easy to manage for the next few years.
So we have administration by crucifixion. Is that
Yeah, and I think a lot of us got well, our ears went up when we heard Al Almendaris make that statement. Unfortunately, not just at the EPA, maybe especially at the EPA, but a lot of agencies have not become a place, to pick the DOJ as an example. They've become a place for activists, people that come with an agenda, and they've got an outcome kind of predetermined, And now all they're looking for is a desk and a badge and a vehicle to facilitate that outcome. A lot of that is going on today. And it's very difficult for average citizens, and I consider myself one of those too that just happen to have the opportunity to pass through the hallowed halls for a few years and see inside the belly of the beast up close and personal. I get why it's very difficult and sometimes alarming for people to say, where's the truth in this? The truth, you got a lot of it from my perspective in John's presentation. For over 60 years, we've been fracking wells. All along those 60 years, and John mentioned this, the technology has improved. We're no longer having guys pour nitroglycerin down wells and light it on fire, him along with it. That's good. That's good. We've gotten better at that. Or nuclear bombs either. That's good too. The process has improved. The safety part of it, the partitioning off of the wells with layers and layers and layers of protection, and something that often gets missed when they say, oh, they're drilling a well down there and they might contaminate my drinking water. Most people forget that you've got thousands, in some cases 10,000s of feet of separation between the water source and what's going on down here to get the energy out. And we've got regulation. I mean, if anybody, there's a whole lot of people that ought to be concerned, along with all of you good people in this room. One of them would be that landowner. Somebody provided the land, especially on private land. Go up to Gillette, Wyoming. Go to my next door neighbors where we've got our ranch now in Jackson County. In many of those cases, that land has been in the family for generations and generations, and they want to keep it that way. You think they want to contaminate Granddad's land that he homesteaded? Not in your life. You want the original conservationists, the environmentalists, it's those people that have depended on sweat, blood, and tears and scraped and saved and sometimes gave it all to hold the place together and looking after people's money. I had a lot of people looking at me. It was the local control was always the best. Always the best. They knew their environment the best. They knew their rock formations the best. In this case, probably about going underground. They were the quickest on a problem and the easiest to solve it, the best to solve it. But what we've got right now is an aggressive effort to federalize this regulation, to take it out of the control of the states and the local government, and let the big shots in Washington at the EPA dictate all of it. I think that is absolutely the wrong way to go. Other than national defense, and that's sometimes a little spotty too, what does the federal government do better than the folks locally can do? So I think what we ought to be doing is, yes, make sure you got a bright light shined on the process. Let's know what's going on. And Colorado just adopted some new regulations that I understand are the most transparent and toughest in the nation.
They're accepted by the EPA with the new frac regulation that came into being last month.
So let's do that. Let's have good, legitimate regulation. And I was impressed at the end of the day that we had both sides of this discussion, including the oil and gas industry, buy off on it. We had our Democrat governor, John Hickenlooper, who I know very well, be willing to go make an ad on behalf of COGA, the Colorado Oil and Gas Administration, and say, I think this is a pretty good deal. That's pretty good testimony. You don't see that very often in the political realm where that happens. So let's shine the bright light. Let's have good regulation. And yes, if there is a problem, let's go after it and go after it aggressively. But for heaven's sakes, folks, we talk about getting the economy going. Economies, I've been pretty close to jobs all my life in a whole bunch of different careers. Economies grow and expand and jobs are created and wealth is created when you've got access to affordable, sustainable supplies of safe energy. We've gotten increasingly reliant on other countries to supply us that energy, and they've got us right here. What we have found out now from multiple studies, a congressional research study I'm familiar with, the Institute for Energy Research has confirmed the same findings. We've got oil and gas in our nation, right here in the U.S., to supply us in total for over 2 centuries. And that's based on what we know today. We're continually finding more. I mean, it makes Jimmy Carter's statement again look totally ludicrous. to have suggested that 30 years ago we would have been out of oil and gas. Globally, he said. What are we doing to ourselves? So let's be transparent, let's be smart, but let's not be too smart by half and throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay, it's time for the much promised Q&A session. So, Garrett.
John, you had one hazard there of the guy breathing the silicone.
The silica, yes.
Silicone. But having worked 33 years underground, I'm kind of familiar with this. And working out here at 20 Mile, they gravel their roads underground constantly. But to get that gravel, they don't use any of this gravel we got around here. They haul it in from Mayville so they can get limestone. But I noticed the town, the Forest Service, the county, nobody else gravels their road like that. So I just wonder how much silicone are we getting from just the gravel roads when we drive up our forest?
You know, Gary, can I answer that with an analogy?
Yeah.
Back in the early 70s, Roger Smith came to Denver and he looked at the brown cloud and he said, it's dust. And it's dust from all the gravel that's put on the roads. That gravel chews up into small pieces. And we all laughed. I laughed. I lived here at the time, and I laughed. I said, sure, that's not right. Well, they cut down graveling in combination with other technologies. The brown cloud is mostly, it's back because Denver's bigger now, but it mostly went away. And I commend 20 Mile. That's really awesome that they're doing that. What they're doing is they're creating enormous additional expense on an incremental basis to make sure that their workers are safe. And I don't know of.
The way what I think,
yes,
was bringing up a hazard at the well. And I didn't want that to be blown out as like oil drilling wells are throwing silicone out there for people to breathe.
I understand. No, it's a very small amount. It's a tiny amount actually. And what it is that the worker shouldn't stand in the dust cloud, and that's the point of that picture.
Gary, you know when the brown cloud was the worst in Denver? During the cattle drive days. It was. Same reason, stirring up the dust. Why do you think all those cowboys weren't bandits? Why do you think they wore that handkerchief around their face? I've been there and done that.
There we go, right back here.
For John, first of all, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
It seems like the environmental side of this equation gets a lot of traction because the oil industry and gas industry is reluctant to say what is exactly in the fracking fluid. Why has the oil and gas industry been so reluctant to say what's in this stuff if in fact, which I believe, is totally environmentally safe?
Business is a competitive environment. Companies are reluctant to, for example, Coca-Cola. Since the 1890s, they still haven't given out or released officially their ingredients to that product that, I don't know, 70% of our nation consumes. It's a competitive environment. It isn't that they want to hide from the public what they're doing. It's more that they want to hide from their competitors, from other oil companies or other stimulation companies, their competitive advantage. They want to retain that advantage.
Well, I have a little problem. I mean, I believe what you're saying. But, I mean, I'm in the aviation industry.
Okay.
We all know how to, all the companies that build jet engines know how to build jet engines. And if this is such a volatile issue, wouldn't it be better for you guys to say, hey, here's what's in it, and it's perfectly safe?
We've actually, the industry has moved forward on that along with along with the government, there were two papers that were released in the last year by a presidential commission on hydraulic fracturing. And one of the outgrowth from from that subcommittee's work, or select committee, excuse me, was the
Disclosure.
exactly, thank you, the disclosure of frac fluids and
He thinks that I say
constituents.
it, yeah.
I was 3 steps ahead. Fracfocus.org. You can go to that website, and there's a list of companies that are operators, oil companies that are contributing to that website. You can actually drill down through the state, through the county, to individual wells, and then see the frac fluids that were used in those individual wells.
But it would eliminate about half this issue
Yep.
if
Now-
this thing was the headlines of the paper.
If I can go one more step here, the government has become involved in hydraulic fracturing through the use of diesel. Diesel was used as an additive in frac fluids in relatively small amounts. The diesel has benzene and other compounds in it that are carcinogenic. The EPA, through the presence of diesel fuel, was able to begin the process of regulation of hydraulic fracturing. And I've quizzed, in the past 5 days, I've quizzed all the consultants in our firm. We're working in the Appalachian Basin, in the Arkoma Basin, in the Williston Basin. None of our consultants are using diesel in their frac fluids that they're pumping today. So I think that diesel is being diminished as we speak.
Jerry?
The last few years, there was the benzene in silt in Rifle, Colorado, big issue. So if the benzene was in the groundwater, how do they get that out of there? How does that displace today? And they must have used diesel then in the fracturing process.
I'm going to have to plead ignorance on a little bit of that. I know the situation that you're talking about. You're talking about West Divide Creek. An operator had fractured wells with our Achilles tendon, with a not good cement job. And that frac job went up the casing and came out through a formation that was exposed to a creek, and there was bubbling in the creek bed. Now, I don't know that there's been a positive fingerprint from the state is still working on this, and they haven't finalized their last report on the chemical fingerprint of these fluids. So I can say that there's a problem there. I intensely dislike the company that's caused that problem. And next question.
Yes, sir.
For John, is the shale strata in Colorado mainly for gas liquids, or oil?
Depends on where you are.
What, in this area?
In this area, oil. In northwestern Colorado, the Niobrara is an oil-producing formation that has very little gas associated with it. For example, the Mancos Shale will be, and that's south of here, that would be south of Grand Junction. That is, I believe that's more of a dry gas, or a dry gas with some liquids.
Okay. Right over here.
Question for Bob, and he touched on it, all the different authorities, federal, state, local. I mean, you know, I read about the EPA, the Department of the Interior, the Gas and Oil Commission, the state, the county, all have their finger in this. And it seems to me, you know, it's professionals monitoring professionals. My question is, where do you think the ultimate authority lies in any dispute on fracking? And do you see this ending up in the courts? And who's going to be fighting who?
Well, if if some of the anti-crowd can get it to the courts, they certainly will, and they'll go court shopping if they can, and try to find a friendly judge or a friendly venue, a judicial venue, if they can. I think here's something to be weary of, in my opinion. I said what I strongly believe is that this should be a states' rights, a states' regulated issue. Because John might want to opine on this too. The formations, the regulations then in Pennsylvania in the Marcellus formation might be different than what we find out here with the Niobrara, which they might find different in North Dakota in the Bakken, which they might find a whole lot different in the big gas fields in Texas. That's why I think local control and the interest of the property rights or the property owner as well, the interest of the local town folks, I think will be best represented that way. Here's the thing to be concerned about. The federal government has played over the years in different arenas the federal government trump card. That they have sovereignty over everybody else on everything whenever they say it. And unfortunately, in my opinion, courts have typically upheld that right. I think that has been a travesty of the 10th Amendment, and I think it has played negatively on the states' rights question. So I think is it going to get played out in court? Probably, and maybe it should. I just fear which way the decision comes down. I think this is an opportunity for the states to maybe reassert their authority, their rightful authority, in my opinion, but it's risky.
Do you think at the moment the county commissioners and the state are in sync together?
I don't have any evidence to the contrary. I would certainly stand corrected on that, but I don't know of a situation where the two aren't at least communicating well and functioning well. I am, from my personal experience as well as just a general principle, I'll say again, I think the state and local governments are the best place to regulate. Let me give you an example of what really alarms me. I'm fine with regulators calling it as it really is. If they find a problem, and we're talking about energy, the EPA finds a problem, they go through all the science and all the testing, and they come to a conclusion, and that to me would include peer review and the participation with the local authorities in the state as well. Fine, let us know about it. But there's three examples recently. I think John touched on one of them. One in Dimmock, Pennsylvania, one in Parker County in Texas, and one nearby in Pavilion, Wyoming, where the EPA absolutely rushed to judgment. I don't think there's any way that you can look at those three cases and think that this was politics trumping policy. They issued draft reports, they got sensationalized headlines, which is what I think they were exactly after. And in all three cases, they had to back up and say, whoops, maybe we jumped the gun a little bit here. You know, 3 strikes, you're out. This is bad government, and it's why there's so much suspicion, I think, among the population. What they're trying to do is exactly what Al Armendariz, the Region 6 regulator, said. They're trying to find somebody and make an example of them and intimidate them and scare them away. That's why guys like Steve Forbes said this is the most anti-oil and gas administration in the history of the United States of America. That covers a lot of ground. And that's not the kind of thing I think we need right now, given our dependence on foreign sources, given our economic situation, given the need to find sustainable sources of affordable energy to keep America going. I think it's a national security risk as well, which we could talk another hour or so on. But energy is crucially important to the safety, the security, the advancement of the United States of America, and we've been given too much of that oil.
In the back here. Yeah.
You mentioned that you dislike a particular operator. One of the concerns, as I understand it, is that given the way leases and contracting work, you may not have final say on who the operator is. Is that valid?
No, that's not correct. The operator is the operator of record. That is, they are the de facto owner in person responsible for the activities, the oil and gas producing activities. And the operator is the one who has the lease on of the mineral rights on a particular parcel.
And those leases were sold? You need to clarify that, they're only top leases.
Yes, okay, all right. Okay, we just opened a can of worms. Let's talk leases for a moment. We have, your suggestion, Danny, I'd be glad to help.
Well, I'm just saying that your example's fine, but there's also top leases where the operator will change, and depending on who has that top lease.
Absolutely correctly. Leases can be exchanged, they can be sold, or if a lease is about to expire or getting close to the end of its term, an operator, a different operator, may come to the landowner and say, I will offer you a bonus payment for a top lease. That is, we will pay you X number of dollars if you promise to lease us your land when the ongoing lease expires. So yes, I think that would be correct to answer that in a manner of speaking. Once you sign a lease, a mineral lease, to lease your mineral rights, unless there's wording in there, a non-transference wording, you don't have any control on who the lease is transferred to. That's one of the reasons that you need to be very careful in signing legal documents and get good advice on that.
There's one young lady back here trying to ask a question. Right there you go. Right back here. Yep. Go ahead.
We've heard a lot about earthquakes. Is any of this associated with earthquakes?
Excellent question. This phenomenon.
Can you repeat it?
Oh yes, absolutely. The question was earthquakes. Are earthquakes associated with hydraulic fracturing? Was that your question?
Yes.
No. Now, let me tell you what is associated with hydraulic fracturing. Disposal wells. They're Class 2 underground injection wells that dispose of industrial waste. That could be oil and gas waste, that is produced water or flowback water. It could be chemical waste from chemical production, or it could be very toxic stuff from nuclear weapons production. And earthquakes associated with disposal wells, that phenomenon was first seen in the late 1960s in the Denver area. At the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, there was a deep disposal well that was drilled. It was drilled 12,000 feet deep into the granite basement rocks. And they were injecting fluid, their waste from the industrial activity there on the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, injecting that waste into that granite interface at the bottom of the sedimentary structure. That was lubricating a fault. That fluid being pumped in there was providing lubrication, and it caused the fault to move and causing an earthquake. Minor earthquakes have been seen in, I think they've pretty much tied it down to disposal wells in eastern Ohio. And I think we can all take that to the bank. The reason that this disposal well was causing an earthquake is it was injecting into a zone, duly authorized, it was all the right thing to do, but there was a fault nearby that they had not seen in their geologic mapping. Once the fault started moving, they stopped injecting the water. The state stepped in and stopped them, and to my knowledge, I think the earthquakes in eastern Ohio have pretty much subsided. Central Oklahoma, not tied to oil and gas activities whatsoever.
Okay. One more. Here we go.
How much disposable waste is there in the process of fracturing? Where does that go?
Let's see, let's pick a, see if I can get some numbers here for you. Oh, how much waste is there? And so how much of disposal?
Yeah, how much of a product, a byproduct that's contaminated do they have to deal with in the fracturing process? Where does it go?
Okay, we have, after a fracturing process, we have flowback fluid. And flowback fluid, and that is a combination of formation fluid, which may be water, or it may be oil or gas, and the fracturing medium, the fracture fluid. And it's an admixture of the two that are flowing back. Before I try and answer that, I also want to state that water production is a normal part of oil production. There's an awful lot of water produced that's associated with oil production, and all of that, most all that water is disposed of.
And that's
through
generally
disposal.
salt water, right? We're not
Typically salt water, yes.
When we were underground, or underwater.
That is
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
That's remaining from the
ancient oceans.
Great Salt Lake is the remainder of that giant Cretaceous sea. I'm digressing. May I target a questioner?
Sure.
Have I answered your question? I don't know if I have.
No, what I hear from people is that there's a lot of waste in the process that has to be contained, or they have to dig out places to put it. I'm trying to figure out what is the hazard about that.
The wastewater in the oil and gas industry is segregated in two containments. In a modern facility, there's a primary containment, which is a steel tank that the fluid is received into. Then around the steel tank is a secondary containment in case the primary leaks. And the secondary containment is sized so that it will handle the leakage of a primary containment within it. There are in-ground pits that are used for the storage of production water in older oil and gas facilities. Those pits are lined. They're lined with a plastic, or they're lined with a clay layer in the bottom to keep that water from filtrating out into the formations. I'm not sure, Bob, can you get an answer to that question for me? Help flesh out an answer for me?
Well, I don't know that I've got any more information than he does, but it's my understanding, help me if I'm wrong here, the key word I thought was contaminated. How, and if it's contaminated, is this like nuclear waste that you can't go near it forever and ever, or is this organic material? How dangerous is the product, and what kind of volume is there? Is that
right?
It's 100% organic to start off.
That's what I thought.
It's 100% organic. 100% oil is naturally occurring in the environment.
Organic could be arsenic, right?
That's true. Absolutely true. Each one of the waters, the production waters that are produced in a field or in a well, they each have different constituents and different levels of total dissolved solids and chlorides and zinc and arsenic and all these other compounds.
How about toxicity?
If there's a lot of produced water, and this has been in the news here recently locally, we'll get into that in just a second. There is the capability of the surface discharge of oil and gas waters. That is, let it run out, right out of the valve, through a holding pond and into a creek. They can only do that if the water passes very stringent tests, both for chemical composition as well as for lethality to microorganisms that are placed within the fluid. And if there's a mortality within those microorganisms above a very small fraction, then they can't dispose of the water on the surface. What produced water, I'm trying to think of how to answer your question. Produced water, if you can take a bath in it, you can jump in it, I wouldn't suggest you drink it, but you can do most any activity with it. It may have an odor, it may smell like our hot springs, or it may have no odor at all. But generally, it is not toxic. There are not chemicals in a large enough concentration in it to be toxic.
That's my understanding as well.
And I really wanted to let one person ask a question who's been passed over, and that's Mr. Lewis.
Okay.
Thank you. I liked your slide showing the Bakken well quantities that came out. It would be great at some point to see what came out of the Quicksilver well here with the propane.
But
well, actually, I know
go ahead.
if you could produce something like that, it would be excellent for us to see that example here in our neighborhood. But I actually had a question about when you do a propane frac, there's a flip side to this of the regulation that there's some exemptions of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and those things. And there's an exemption that Judy Jordan told us about at the Community Alliance Forum, that the fluids that come out of this process, if they came out of any other industry, would be called hazardous waste. But because they come out of this process, they are not. So I'm concerned about those exemptions, the other side of the laws.
I think that you that was an assertion, and what I'd like to do is to be able to address that specifically with some facts. We could talk about that directly, but
I've never even heard the assertion. That's news to me. If indeed there was an exemption that wide, that'd take a really big truck to even drive it through that one. I can't believe that Congress hasn't been all over that.
Okay.
That's hard for me to even imagine.
Steve, here's the exemption that you're referring to, I believe.
She worked in Garfield County.
Well, here's part of the exemption. The underground injection part of the exemption. That is fluids from a you have a Class 2 disposal well. That is a well that is specifically purpose-built to dispose of fluids. Those fluids are controlled by the EPA. Okay, that they are regulated. That is an underground injection facility. However, a hydraulic fracturing job is not the same purpose as an underground injection facility. There's a lawsuit in Alabama brought by the group Leaf that obtained a judgment stating that the reason for the exemption for hydraulic fracturing, really just in the balance of scales and weighing the words, there was really no difference between the two. And between a single time injection of hydraulic fracturing versus continued injection of disposal fluids. Okay, so that's I think that's the Halliburton loophole that's referred to in the press. And I would like, if we can, the opportunity to discuss that in private or in another domain. I'd be glad to discuss that with you.
Okay, we've run a little bit over, but I haven't noticed anybody nodding off, so I think we're okay. I want to let Bob make a wrap-up comment, then Jennifer and I'll get us wrapped up for the evening here. So Bob, what do you say?
Inherent in this discussion and a whole lot of other ones seems to be two divergent kind of basic philosophies. One is built on a premise that people are the problem. that we're somehow destroying our own world and we can't be trusted, and you got it up there already? Yeah. And the other is one that I subscribe to, and that's that in large part, although we do some stupid things as human beings from time to time, but you know, we do some pretty smart things too. I mean, if it wasn't for somebody figuring it out, we wouldn't know how to get this energy out of the ground. If somebody hadn't figured it out, I couldn't attended a breakfast in Denver today, driven up to my ranch, and driven over here to see you folks all on the same day, and now I'm going to go back home to my ranch tonight. And, I mean, I couldn't, just a generation or two ago, that would have been physically impossible as well as technologically impossible. Now we fly to the moon and we think it's just kind of ordinary standard operating procedure to send a rocket ship up into space and bring the guys back. This is, I continually marvel at what people can do with challenges that seem to be insurmountable if we put our minds and our wills and talents to it, especially collectively. I really did grow up being told over and over again, we're about to run out of oil, gas, coal. We thought we had enough of that for a while, but of course you can't go near that stuff, right? And then we found ways to use clean coal technology to utilize that. And oh, by the way, this study that came out, I'm going to cite it again, the Congressional Research Service has been backed up by several others. To put it in context, the United States of America has more total barrel of oil equivalents of energy than Saudi Arabia, Canada, and China combined. We have massive resources. We've been led to believe, one, that we don't, and two, that we shouldn't go get it. And that to me just seems absolutely stupid. It's sort of like, you know, the Joseph in the story in the Bible where you got the grain in the granaries. How about feeding the people? Feed the people. We need some energy. Let's put smart people like John and many of you, I think, in this room. From my understanding, there's a few other folks with some energy background here. Let's, you know, unleash the hounds. Let's be transparent and all that and watch over their shoulder, but let's go get it. Let's go get it.